Hello. Gosh, I can't even speak. Hello, it's time for another live look at the astrology. My name is Katie Sweetman, and this is your look at the astrology for March 6th through 12th, 2023. 2023. Geez. Saturn is at the very last degree of Aquarius as I speak, and my mind is kind of in two places at the same time. How are you all doing? Yes, we have a lot of astrology to talk about this week. We have Saturn finally going into Pisces starting tomorrow. We also have a full moon at the same time. So we've got two big major events, and something that I've been talking about over and over again is there's a lot of stuff going on in March of 2023. We have Saturn going into Pisces, and we also have Pluto going into Aquarius in a couple of weeks. Don't worry, we'll talk about that too. Mars will finally get out of Gemini. It's been this sort of long slog through Gemini since August of all time. So yeah, we've got a lot to talk about. Just to sort of reintroduce myself, because apparently by the way, I was driving back from my father's place. If you saw me last week, yes, I was in that kind of closet corner that you all see me in. So much better background. But it didn't mean I was doing some highway driving today. My brain, I guess, is still somewhere on I-95. So anyway, my name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm an astrologer and psychic medium here in the New York City area. And every week we gather live to look at the astrology. And something that you hear me say over and over again, the astrology is 50%. You are the other 50%. So how do we navigate these times? Because it is a little crunchy, a lot of heaviness going on. Will Saturn make everything better when it goes into Pisces? I don't know. It'll just be different. It'll be different. And hopefully now that Saturn is getting out of what's called a square to Uranus, that we have, a little bit of a break from that really intense energy that we felt, especially in 2021 and 2022. But so we're in this sort of liminal space today. Saturn has finally reached the end of Aquarius. I almost said good riddance, but I'd be doing a disservice to myself by saying that, because I think there was a really powerful lessons, plural, with Saturn's time in Aquarius. And I think it's good for each and every one of us to really integrate them and to integrate them well, because these are the lessons, these are the light bulbs, these are the realizations, these are the choices and the commitments that bring us into the next few years with Saturn and Pisces. These are the things that these are the things that these things can't be taken away from us. What I'm trying to say inarticulately. Wow. Anyway, yeah, I guess my brain's at 29 degrees of Aquarius too. But yeah, how are you all doing? How are you all feeling? This sort of, we're on the edge of something. I, wrote all about Saturn and Pisces. It's on my website, empoweringastrology.com. If you want a little bit of something to read and have some insights, and it was a lot to write on, there's just a lot of writing this weekend, getting you all prepared for Saturn and Pisces, because this is going to be one of the big themes over the next few years. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. So if you are watching me live, do say hello. Let me know how you're doing, how you're feeling, where you're watching from. It's always nice to see where in the world everybody is located. It kind of warms my Sagittarius rising heart. And as I said earlier, I'm in the New York City area. So I'm just right across the river from New York City. So yeah, let's get into this week. We've been talking about this for a while now. And in fact, I think I even started giving you all breadcrumbs for Saturn and Pisces last year. And because I was saying, hey, get ready, there's going to be a big time change. And you know me, and I talk about it, how much I love Saturn. And the reason I love Saturn, despite its heaviness and sometimes the heavy-handed things that we have to learn with Saturn in a sign, because it's very black and white about what it wants. Build, construct, put things back into balance, do the work. Wherever Saturn is, that's the area of our life that we can't slack off on. But the flip side of it is that if we do the work, we really see, like the reward. Not like in a sort of, I did my homework, Saturn, give me a reward. But it's just like, wow, look what I built. Look what I constructed. Look who I became. Look at the choices that I made over the past few years. And hopefully we can feel good about those choices that we make, who we've become. I'm not saying it wasn't easy, especially because we had some pretty difficult, certainly astrology over the past few years that really wanted something to shift and transform. And in some cases, shift and transform that in places that we never thought would ever change. And that's been a little bit of the instability the past few years. The last time Saturn was in Pisces was 1994 through 1996. Certainly a very different time in my life. And that's sometimes, for those that don't know that much of the ins and outs of astrology, Saturn takes 29 and a half years to go around the sun, which means it takes 29 and a half years to go through the entirety of the zodiac. Astrology is just about telling time. It's about telling time, symbolic time, metaphoric time, the energy of time, how we live time, and each and every one of you is going to live that time differently through the prism of your own astrology. But we also have the collective experience. This is why I can write about Scorpio or Gemini or Sagittarius and talk about a commonality, our common experience. And of course, you're all different people, but you're all kind of in that same time. So tomorrow, March 7th, the time changes. One of the hour hands or the major hands on the astrology clock goes from Aquarius, where it's been since March 2020. Yes, March of 2020. It did go out of Aquarius on July 1st of 2020, and then it went back into Aquarius on December 17th, 19th, can't remember which one, of 2020. Saturn typically spends about 2.5 years to 3 years in a sign. The last time Saturn was in Aquarius was 1991 through 1993. It was, certainly from a technological standpoint, we saw a lot of big changes with the internet that time. The internet went from something that was a little bit more obscure, a little bit more connected to military technology, and then suddenly, maybe not suddenly, but people started to get online. It was pretty radical at the time. But yeah, I didn't get my first email address until, 1996. I still have my Hotmail address. Anyway, long story short, I have a Hotmail address that's going to be going through a Saturn return in a couple of years. But anyway, so when Saturn was back in Aquarius in the 1960s, we saw a lot of social themes, social issues, social causes, social justice, civil rights. So we're starting to see some themes as we got through our time in Saturn and Aquarius. Well, here we are, Saturn's in Pisces. Saturn was in Pisces again, 94 through 96, 64, summer 63 for a couple of months, 64, 65, 66. And so, of course, you can keep going back to affinity. But it's sort of to see these different threads in history. And yes, if you were born during the mid-1960s or even the mid-1990s, you're going to be having something called a Saturn return. It's one of the most important moments of your life. No big deal. It's a whole other story for a whole other time. But anyway, yeah, so Saturn going into Pisces. Pisces is a very different sign than Aquarius. Aquarius is about our world. Both Capricorn and Aquarius, they were ruled by Saturn. So they deal with our manifested world, both the manifested world that we can see, like construction and buildings and even sort of like the physicality of our life, and then the things that we can't see. Our laws, our systems, our networks, our society, our humanity, our communities, and sort of the ideology that, kind of run through these different systems. But when we get to Aquarius, we're going beyond. It's not Aquarius. We go to Pisces. Sorry, we get to Pisces. We are going beyond the physical world. And I think sometimes it's hard to wrap our heads around. I think I sometimes get the most unsubscribes when I talk about Pisces and Neptune, because we are in a very subjective place. It's not rational and analytical like it was with Saturn in Aquarius. It's now intuitive, feeling, subjective. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. It forms the bridge between our physical life and our non-physical life. Doesn't matter what you believe in, but hopefully we all can agree that we dream, that we close our eyes and we go someplace, even if there's no way to prove it. Yeah, you can't prove your dreams. You can hook yourself up to electrodes, you can prove that your brain is doing something, but you can't prove that the dream that you had, that you actually had it. So yeah, that's the thing about the subjectiveness of Pisces. And so we have to get into subject matter and feeling that is very personal to us. What do we believe in? You know, not the beliefs of Sagittarius. And I'm mentioning Sagittarius because it's the sister sign of Pisces. These are two Jupiter-ruled signs. A little technical moment for like me kind of nerd out on the astrology for a moment. If you look at the zodiac, you have Sagittarius, Jupiter, and then it's two Saturn-ruled signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, and then you get Pisces. So you got Jupiter sort of, you know, or Saturn is the meat to Jupiter sandwich. Hopefully that made sense. But it sort of shows us that with Jupiter ruling Sagittarius, it's faith and truth and meaning that we see in the world through our experiences in the world, whether it's to go to school, university, college, whether it's to read all the books that we can get our hands on, whether it's to educate ourselves in many different ways, whether it's to travel and to explore. But that belief, that knowledge comes from the external world when we're in Sagittarius. But when we're in Pisces, those beliefs and knowledge, it comes from within. And so each and every one of you in your own way over the next few years, you have to sort of get in touch with yourself. You have to look within. You have to start to contemplate, if you don't already, things that maybe are very spiritual and esoteric. Maybe you start meditating, or maybe you start to feel that sort of deeper existential question, like, what is this it? You know, sometimes we can get into that. There are two sides to Pisces: the highest of the high, which is almost like spiritual ecstasy, and also the lowest of the lows, which is that deep existential pain that sometimes goes hand in hand with addiction. So we have to look at the two sides of Pisces over the next few years, and we have to sort of investigate, search, go into the deepest parts of ourself, and if you believe in something beyond this world, the deepest parts of our soul. And it can be at a very enriching time. And sort of the example, I think, was a couple of these ago that when I mentioned that, you know, I think it was 94 that I first read Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. I was 14, and I was like, it read so much like truth to me. And that was what was called my first Saturn opposition, because I'm Saturn in Virgo. But anyway, yeah, so this, you know, I'm using that as a personal example because, you know, we may start to look, whether it's to a book, whether it's to a different philosophy or a different faith, or we're searching for something over the next few years. And this is where it's subjective. Only you can find that answer. Of course, you can turn to other people. You could read a book. You can take a class. You can meet with a spiritual leader. You can find that spirituality within yourself. And so I was such a weird kid when I was a teenager. I read that book, and then I got really into past life regression and hypnotherapy, like as one does as a teenager. And I got like really on this like thread of reading all the books I could about reincarnation and past life and spirituality. Here we are, 30 years later. But yeah, it's where I kind of bring in that spiritual component to my astrology. And it was Saturn and Aquarius when I first got into astrology. I first got my first my first astrology program on a DOS computer, really dating myself. And so I think whether it is astrology, whether it's something else in your life, I think we're all trying to just figure things out the best we can. And, maybe we learn to give each other grace over the next few years. Best case scenario, get some grace. But like, again, Pisces is a very different energy. It's not an energy that we are unfamiliar with. We have had Neptune in Pisces over the last 10 years. It went into Pisces in 2012, and it will be in Pisces until 2025, and I believe 2026, kind of the same timeline as Uranus, if I'm not mistaken. But Neptune's a very subtle energy, and I think, for better or for worse, it's been opening us up to a lot of different things over the past 10 years. Maybe that's why everybody's now into astrology and crystals. Maybe, everybody seems to be losing their minds too. But anyway, Pisces is not an energy that we're unfamiliar with. And Saturn is going to come in, and Saturn is an energy that we're very familiar with. It's very grounded. It's very practical. It wants to build and construct. But how do you build and construct something in a sign that is inherently not of this world? So it means that we're building something that we can't see. We're building something on faith. We're building something that we have to sort of use our intuition to feel out. For some of us, we really build compassion, or we build our empathy, for example. And for some people, it is a look at the role of spirituality in their lives. And I don't mean religion when I say spirituality, because religion is, somebody telling you it has to be this way. But spirituality is the beating heart of religion. It's like, it's not enough to read something in a book. You have to actually feel it yourself. And so that's maybe one of the things that Saturn and Pisces is saying to us over the next few years. You have to feel it yourself. And maybe that brings up some complicated emotions, some feelings about emptiness and searching for something, but it's hard to say. I mean, we can't completely use history as a metric, because the world, very different than it was in 1994 through 1996. Maybe we'll have really great music. Certainly there was great music in the mid-90s and even the mid-60s. Maybe, we'll kind of get into the artisticness and the sort of the flow of Pisces. Pisces loves to swim, it loves to dance. Maybe we're all going to be aware of healing in a very different way. Because healing, Pisces healing is a very different type of healing than Virgo, its opposite sign. And we will, let's kind of put a little bookmark into Virgo, because we're going to talk about that in a moment with the full moon in Virgo tomorrow. Also, a lot of things going on tomorrow. But healing, like, how do we learn to let go? And let go, that's one thing when it's like a word or a phrase. It's like, it's abstract. It's another thing to actually truly let go. And letting go means to make peace with the things that maybe we shouldn't, on paper at least, make peace with. Rationally, analytically, how could I ever make peace with this? But we have to. I don't know, we don't have to do anything. Your life is your own. But maybe we'll be a little bit more at peace as a world if we find peace within. It's a tall order. Like I said, Pisces, it has the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. And I think on some very practical level, we have to reckon, maybe that's a big word, but it's Saturn, reckon with where we numb out, where we choose not to see, where we pretend something doesn't exist, where we will spend a whole day just completely binging a show or using substance. No judgment. I'm just speaking for Saturn for a moment. So yeah, big day. And use Monday today, March 6th, to just kind of reflect on the past few years. did that while I was driving up 95 today. I was like, all right, what are the positives and what are the negatives? What are the wins? And something I was saying this to a friend of mine not that long ago, it's like celebrate the wins, because when we don't celebrate the victories, it's, I don't know, our life is poor for it. So anyway, celebrate the victories. That's your homework today, Monday, March 6th, and then we get into March 7th, Tuesday. So before Saturn can get into Aquarius, sorry, Jesus said it again, before Saturn can get into Pisces, it's like learning to write the new date. Like, I'm so used to saying Saturn in Aquarius. So before Saturn can get into Pisces, we have a Virgo full moon tomorrow, March 7th. It is at 7:40 a.m. Eastern, so it's kind of earlier in the day. And that full moon, Saturn's at 29 Aquarius. So it's very interesting. This full moon is in Virgo. Virgo is that very practical, grounded side to Pisces, is very subjective, spiritual, liminal side. And I actually personally really love the dynamic between Pisces and Virgo. My notes are in Virgo Pisces. But I love how Pisces can be very magical. It can have a lot of faith, so much faith. But also we need to balance that out with Virgo. So it can't be so magical that we lose the practicality and we lose our touch with reality. Can't be so grounded and realistic that we lose the magic. So I think that that's something that we need to sort of feel into as we go into this full moon, because we have the full moon in Virgo at 16 degrees, and then we have Mercury, I think it's at 7 degrees of Pisces. So we have this really, dynamic energy with the ruler in the opposite sign of the full moon. And so it really gets into that Virgo Pisces dynamic. Like, how do we have the courage to go beyond our physical world, but at the same time, how do we keep our feet on solid ground? How do we take care of our physical bodies? Virgo is a sign of health and wellness. It's also the sign of systems. I know that's like kind of a big crunchy word, but Aquarius is about the big systems, our social systems, humanity, society, getting things back and forth, the things that we believe in, ideology, information. Virgo is small systems. It's our day-to-day, it's our routines, it's our structure, it's our duties and responsibilities. And I actually really love Virgo. I think it's a very underappreciated sign in astrology, because it's not as glamorous as sometimes as the other signs, certainly not as glamorous as Pisces. So I think Virgo is going to be giving us a little bit of a reality check this week, sort of to get things done, take care of our physical being, take care of our physical health, get things organized. But at the same time, Mercury is in Pisces. We have to, learn to trust our intuition, learn to trust our gut. If something doesn't feel right, maybe it isn't right. For example, it can't be so Virgo that we lose the fact that Sun, Neptune, Mercury are all in Pisces right now. This full moon with Saturn at 29 degrees of Aquarius, it's kind of like that last big check-in with Saturn and Aquarius. And maybe whatever decisions that we've been thinking about, we now have to take some practical action on it. The other thing is that the full moon makes a square to Mars in Gemini. Mars, this is come next week. It's going to make a square, come next week, Mars is going to actually finally clear its retrograde shadow and get past that 25 degree mark of Gemini, which is where it turned retrograde on October 30th. But I think Mars is trying to get us to take action, to do something around this full moon, to make a decision. And maybe this decision takes us into Saturn's arrival in Pisces later in the day. Then we get into later this week, we have Mercury coming up to a sextile with Uranus. That's on Saturday, the 11th of March. So maybe on Saturday, the 11th, we got some insights, especially new insights with Saturn and Pisces. And then we get also a Venus sextile Mars. It's going to be a little sexy. Sextiles generally are a little bit quiet. You have to look for them a little bit. They can smooth things over. They can open up doors. So maybe things are a little bit more interesting, maybe social or even a date or romance. Mars and Venus typically like a little bit of romance in our life. Very unromantic, Jupiter makes a conjunction to Chiron on the 12th of March. And Jupiter and Chiron will be at 14 degrees of Aries. And because Jupiter rules Pisces and Pisces season and sort of the other half of this Virgo full moon, I think there's some element of needing to move forward on something, to sort of take a leap of faith. Maybe even to have the courage and bravery to go after what we desire, for example. So we've got some, again, big astrology this week. I see some familiar faces in the chat. Thank you so much. If you want a couple of bigger dives into Saturn and Pisces, I did write my Saturn and Pisces overview report. It's on my website, empoweringastrology.com. Link is also in the show notes. And I did a sign-by-sign look. If you want the big, deep dive, I've been talking about it for a few weeks at this point. I did a 3-hour webinar on Saturn and Pisces because it's really important to work with Saturn consciously and with awareness over the next few years, because Saturn, for example, wants you to build your career. Isn't it good to actually be proactive and do that, or relationship or health and wellness, for example? But when we go through each of the 12 signs in a moment, you'll get your little insight into what is going on and where's Saturn putting its focus over the next 3 years for you until 2025 and 2026. Further, also in my, it's called Saturn in Pisces, A Look Within, I did put some dates, some key dates, the retrogrades. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. So something that's kind of curious, and we'll have to go and check in back in June when we get to this point. This year, Saturn gets only as far as 7 degrees of Pisces, and it turns retrograde on June 17th. I find it very curious that at the time of this full moon, Mercury is at 7 degrees of Pisces. So it may mean that there's something around this full moon, there's something about events or decisions that connect to Saturn's retrograde in just a few months' time on June 17th. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. So let's look at the astrology for each of the 12 signs, just your friendly reminder to listen for both. I know sometimes you get better information for your sun sign, better information for your rising. Just do what feels right for you. That's my very Piscean answer. My astrologer answer is that it's both. You're going to see two different perspectives on your life, but that's just the way that I look at things. So anyway, let's start with, let's start with Aries. So Aries, we've been talking about this, sort of getting you ready for the fact that Saturn's arrival in Pisces marks the start of the end of this major cycle for you. One that began back in 1996-97 when Saturn was in your sign, Aries. But here we are, Saturn's now reached the end of your personal zodiac. And when Saturn goes into the 12th, which is what this is, Saturn going into 12th sign, this is a 3-year chapter where you're sort of letting go of the past. You're starting to prepare to release things that you've been attached to sort through the memories and sometimes even the physical things that you've been holding on to. I once said to a client, it's like, hey, Saturn's in your 12th right now. It's like, it's as if you're cleaning out the boxes of the last 30 years. And she's like, I'm literally cleaning out the boxes of the last 30 years. I'm about to move house. So yeah, sometimes it's literal, but it's, maybe the big question for you, Aries, is what is your baggage? Whether it's literal baggage or spiritual baggage or emotional baggage, because when Saturn goes through the 12th, we have to really divest ourselves. We have to go through the baggage and be like, you know what? I don't need this in the next phase of my life. And I'm going to keep coming back to this point, but you want to be very conscientious about what you're still holding on to when Saturn starts to go into Aries in 2025 and 2026. Because especially in 2026, February 14th, 2026, Saturn goes finally into Aries fully, and whatever is with you, it's with you. It's with you for the next cycle. So you can use this next few years very proactively. You can detach from things. You can let go of sufferings, addictions. The Pisces is the two fishes swimming in two different directions. And it's like, which way is your fish swimming? Is it swimming back home or is it swimming away? And so it's a very deeply spiritual, existential time over the next few years, but it also can be a very beautiful time. I mean, it depends on your relationship with meditation, retreat, the search for faith, the search for truth and meaning, finding that deep inner wisdom within. But you may feel Aries in this kind of, you have to sort of see how this fits with the rest of your astrology, that you sort of have like one foot in a life and one foot sort of in another life. You might feel kind of pulled in two different places. But you might also feel like something is sort of wrapping up and coming to an end. And I will also kind of pivot for a moment and go to your Mars. Mars is finally starting to get out of its retrograde shadow. That's more like next week. But you're going to, March is going to have some big changes for you. And this is just the start of it. Taurus. So Taurus, Saturn is wrapping up 3 years in your career sign. And, this has been a time when Saturn's been asking you, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And maybe you have an answer today, and, maybe you don't. I don't know. No pressure. But, whatever you've built in your professional life over the next few years, it does take you into the next 3. Saturn's time in Pisces for you turns your attention, I wouldn't say completely away from your professional life, but it is more visionary for you. It's about like, where do we want to go? Like, what are our goals now? Maybe you spent the last few years really working hard, taking the next step up in your professional life, standing in new positions, positions of authority, for example. What next? And so I think, especially with Pisces and Pisces being, such a sign that's, kind of keeps things close to the heart, you want to make sure that whatever you're aligning yourself for the future is really, in alignment with your heart and your soul. The next few years, kind of like the last 3 years, does put a lot of emphasis on friendship, community, social connections, or the groups that you are in alliance with, or sort of maybe sometimes that feeling like maybe you don't have friends. You maybe need to work on building, constructing, or even rebuilding your social circle. I know it's been a little bit hard the past few years for everybody's social circle. That said, it is about looking towards the future, getting involved in your community. With Pisces, maybe this might mean acts of service in your community, doing volunteering, for example. Gemini. So Saturn is wrapping up its time in what's called your 9th. And we've been talking about this in previous videos together. And this has been a time about getting very clear about what you believe in, what you stand for, what you think is true, sort of the compass that you align your worldly life to. And sometimes that compass comes through philosophy, it comes through education, sometimes it comes through travel, and sometimes it comes even through religion, for example. But Saturn going into Pisces this week, it's the start of a major hour for you, Gemini. If you think back to it, and maybe you don't really realize this because you're not an astrologer, but a lot of the action actually has been happening in other signs. It's been happening in the cardinal signs, and it's been happening in the fixed signs. But with Saturn going into Pisces, now it's a lot about the mutable signs. And hey, you are a mutable sign, Gemini. Mutable signs, they talk about wisdom and knowledge and information and ideas. And that said, Saturn is going to go into what's called your 10th sign of career. And over the next few years, Gemini, you have to really get clear about what do you want to be when you grow up. Every Gemini is different, for example. Maybe you are 2 decades into a career and here comes Saturn. Saturn, it's now your time to really cement your reputation and authority in your professional life. For another Gemini, they're 2 decades into a career, and Saturn goes into Pisces, and now they need to reevaluate that career. Do they still want to keep going in that direction? Do they need to actually shore up something that's not working or make a pivot point, for example, especially as we get into 2024 and 5 when the eclipses go into Pisces and Virgo. Getting ahead of myself. That said, Saturn, if you don't have a sense of place in the world, and this is career, it's your profession, but it's also like that sense of, what do you do in the world? I don't mean this in some sort of modern capitalistic way. It's just we all have to have a role to play in the world, even if it's in our small world. And the bar is set higher for you, Gemini, over the next few years. You have to really make sure that you're in absolute integrity with yourself, integrity with your words and your ideas, and really in the authority and the responsibility and the duties of what you do in the world. If you are in a different phase of life and you are not sure about the role that you want to play in the world, Saturn will happily help you find that role. But you can really look towards the next few years for professional milestones. And because becoming a parent is a career transit, or that's what we call it in astrology, transit, Saturn will be transiting your 10th. Maybe this is time to become a parent, to become a mother, a father, or whatever. So this is a time where you're going to really work hard for the next few years, because Saturn is holding you up to a high bar. But when you get to the end of this time, hopefully you have a lot to show for it, Gemini. Cancer, I know you are one day away from leaving the 8th room. I've been saying it, week in and week out. It's been an emotional gauntlet for you, Cancer. And I say this in absolute, respect. And I've spoken to you. You guys are my clients, Cancer rising. And you all have had different times, whether Saturn's time in the 8th really taught you emotional resiliency, or it taught you to actually face yourself and not be in the illusions. Because that's the thing, when we don't do our work in the 8th, when we get into the 9th, that's where sometimes we can be in the illusion of life and like, oh yeah, everything's fine, whatever. But for those that really dug deep within themselves, now it's time to come out of that space. And sort of Saturn is saying to you, okay, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? What do you think is true? After everything that you've been through the past few years, do you still have faith? And faith is not necessarily the faith of religion, but it's to kind of get into that, what do I believe in? What do I stand for? For example, when Saturn went through the 8th, for me, it killed me. But when it went into the 9th, I was like, that's when I started to get more into astrology on a different level, when I started to get into my spirituality, but I also kind of started to not cement at that time, but really start to build my own sense of personal philosophy. And this is the philosophy that guides my work. So here we are. And so, figure out what you believe in. And, if you don't have faith, you don't have truth, you don't have meaning, Saturn is trying to get you to look towards the world for that. The next few years might be focused on education. For some, it is getting a higher degree or going back to school. For others, education can come in a lot of different ways. Maybe you are traveling more. Maybe you are going to different countries. You're looking at different cultures, different ways of thinking, because you're trying to find truth. Doesn't have to be capital T truth, but it is truth nonetheless, because that sense of personal compass, philosophy, truth, that's going to actually serve you eventually when Saturn goes into your 10th in 2025 and 2026. Leo, so Saturn is getting out of your 7th. So it's been a little bit of a heavy time for Leo, and this is just because a lot of stuff's been happening with the fixed signs, and you are a fixed sign, Leo. But the past few years have been a major time to look at relationship and how you connect, interact, and socialize with people. And maybe you've had to really put yourself out there, for example. So what have you learned? It's important to at least reflect on Saturn's time since 2020 and what you've built and learned and sort of recalibrated and put back into balance with relationships. Because on one hand, Saturn loves relationships. It reminds us that we can't do life alone. On the other, Saturn doesn't like inequity in relationships. And I don't mean transactional equity. It's not about money. It's not about I did this for you, you did this for me. No, it just doesn't like toxic relationships, for example, or a relationship where it's more giving than receiving and more receiving than giving, for example. It's, I think, worth mentioning relationships because Saturn will now take you into the 8th. And the 8th is a very deep emotional space. It's relationships with no intimacy or just roommates. It's not necessarily about sex per se, but the 8th is really leading you into that space of being very vulnerable, opening up, whether it is emotionally, whether it is like physically with another person. And the next few years are trying to get you to dig deep. It is important, and I'm saying this to you, Leo, as you start to go with Saturn the 8th, to make sure you have a lot of structure and support as you go through this time, because it really depends from person to person. If they've done zero personal work, here comes Saturn the 8th, and Saturn saying, hey, I see that you've done zero personal work. I don't know, therapy or maybe different modalities or working in different ways, but regardless, you need to do the work. It is now inescapable. I don't know, maybe you can try to escape Saturn through the 8th, but that's really where it fuels the, let's say, the illusions of Saturn the 9th, kind of getting ahead of myself. So what will the next few years be for you? It's hard to say. Everybody's differently. If you have a deep inner sense of self, it'll be very different than somebody who has no depth inside of them. But Saturn will lead you into the deepest parts of yourself to discover something. And what you discover is what you bring with you when Saturn finally leaves this space in 2026. It is a time of emotional initiations, psychic initiations, again, doing the work, psychotherapy, different forms of counseling. But it also, there is a money side to this time from a very traditional standpoint. And Saturn is also looking at debt. It's looking at wealth, estates, taxes, benefits. It's even looking at debt. I said debt, didn't I say debt? But this idea of power is also tied to money. And over the next few years, you need to make sure that your money situation is tip-top because Saturn loves things to be just in order. That's your marching orders, Leo. Virgo. Hey, Virgo, you have a full moon in your... Yeah, we haven't really been talking about the full moon. We've been talking about Saturn and Pisces, but Saturn sort of trumps what's going on right now with the full moon. That said, because you are a Virgo, there is a full moon in your sign. So Virgo, you are in the spotlight this week. And, do keep in mind that the sun is over in Pisces, and Pisces is something called your relationship sign. So it's a bit of a dynamic full moon, especially with Mercury, your planet, over in Pisces, your relationship sign. So you're really feeling the tension. And tension for some people is that you're actually in a tension with somebody. It could be a primary relationship. For others, there's a dynamic energy, a push to make connection. Maybe relationships are very highlighted this week, for example. It's worth mentioning that Saturn going into Pisces, wherever it is opening up a 3-year chapter that's focused on relationships. And so Saturn is starting to say to you, and again, this is going to be different for every Virgo out there, it's time to take relationships seriously. Saturn loves relationships, but Saturn reminds us that we can't do life alone. But Virgo, being Virgo, is really good at caretaking. It's really good at doing things for everybody. You're so good at it, Virgo, but that's the thing about Saturn going into Pisces. It's starting to say to you, you can't overdo it. You can't try to take on everything yourself. So how do you start to put some equity and balance back into your relationships? For other Virgos, this is the start of a time of serious relationship. Whether it means getting into a serious relationship or really focusing on committed partnership in your life, that comes in a lot of different forms for people. But again, Saturn is like, who is going to be that person? Persons, plural, for you. You know, when I think about Saturn the 7th, it reminds me when I go to the doctor's office and you fill out the intake form, they tell you to put an emergency contact, and you're like, shoot, I'm single. My parents are dead. I'm in a different state. I've got nobody. And so Saturn is like, time to build connection. Libra. So Venus, let's just kind of check quickly in with Venus. Your planet, it's over in the 7th of relationships. It had that beautiful conjunction to Jupiter last week, but there was a little bit of a bittersweet quality. And maybe you are feeling that bittersweet quality this week because Venus has been in the same place as the sky as Chiron. So pay attention to the subtext that's happening in relationships. Subtext, I was talking to a client last week, and there was this kind of question about like moving and buying a house with her boyfriend, and she was kind of like, oh, I don't know about a house, and I was like, it's not about the house. And sometimes it's not about what you think it is. So if there's an argument in a relationship or something else between you and another person, maybe it's about something else. That's Chiron. Chiron kind of shows you what's underneath. That said, Saturn going to Pisces. So it's going into something called your 6th sign of health and wellness. And over the next few years, you need to really take care of your physical being. This means different things to different Libras. If you are a Libra rising who just does not take care of themselves, here comes Saturn. And Saturn's like, what are you doing? Your physical body is like literally one of the most important things that you have. Let's make sure that we can kind of get things back into order. Just remember, Saturn just wants order and balance. For other Libras or Libra risings, it's time to make some positive changes in health and wellness, maybe making changes in diet, fitness, nutrition, whatever works best for your body. But do keep in mind that we are both physical beings and we are non-physical beings. And that full moon in Virgo, for example, on the same day that Saturn goes into Pisces, is a reminder that we are both physical and spiritual. And we have physical health and we have spiritual health. And how do you find the balance between the two? Maybe you're stressed out. Maybe you need to meditate more. Saturn going into Pisces, it's also, yes, it's about physical health, but it's about creating rituals, practice, craft, getting very grounded, which seems a little bit antithetical, because Pisces is not typically a very grounded sign. But how do you bring Pisces into your day-to-day life? Again, by creating rituals, daily practices, mindfulness, for example, eating certain foods, connecting to the things that you're eating, making health almost like a spiritual practice, for example. I don't know, maybe doing yoga, Pilates, whatever works to kind of get you back into your physical being. But that's going to be like the main focus the next few years. And I'm just saying that I'm putting my traditional astrology hat on for a moment. If there is an underlying physical issue, you want to be proactive about this time, because Saturn typically will bring something to the forefront. I'm just saying this to say this. Of course, that doesn't mean you. For example, if you're a pack-a-day smoker, here comes Saturn. And Saturn's like, what are you doing? Why are you smoking, a pack of cigarettes a day? So Saturn kind of wants purity and cleanliness in this part of our chart when it goes through it. So you just sort of see how this manifests for you. Scorpio, aren't you glad that Saturn is getting out of your 4th? It's, and here comes Pluto. We'll talk about that later this month. So Saturn has been saying to you the past couple of years, where is home and who is home? And maybe it would be nice to say that you have a neat and tidy answer today. I don't know. Maybe you are closer to that answer than you were last week and certainly 2 years ago, 3 years ago. That said, Saturn going into your 5th. So this is, I'm going to try to make a little bit of a bigger point. Life needs life. Life needs fun. It needs passion. It needs joy. And I know you're thinking like, no duh. But you're a Scorpio, and sometimes you like to do it a little hardcore. But the astrology reminds us that we need to make sure that our lives have fuel, and that joy and pleasure and creativity and self-expression are some of the fuel for our sort of day-to-day life. over the next few years, you are prioritizing yourself. You're prioritizing fun. You're prioritizing creativity. Sounds great, doesn't it? You also need to take yourself and take your talent seriously. Do keep in mind, talents are not just art. It's not just, we always think that word and we think of somebody who is like a prodigy, for example. Talent comes in a lot of different ways. It is an expression of the things that make you. Really look into the things that only you can do. I'm pretty sure there's something that only you can do. There's only one you on this planet. So over the next few years, you need to really get back to the inner flame. That's the esoteric meaning of this time in your life, because that flame is what you put into everything. For example, for some Scorpios, it may mean not just like putting this into like making something, it's making a child. And Saturn going through this part of the chart can often, for those for whom this is relevant, it can mean the birth of a child, for example. But that said, who are you, Scorpio? And I'm pretty sure that you're all thinking, well, I'm this name. This is the name on my papers. But who you are is not the name on your papers, not the name on your driver's license. It's not the name on your birth certificate. It is what is inside of you. And if that statement seems like an undiscovered country, well, then here comes Saturn and Pisces. And to get into the things that really get you to discover who exactly you are, but also to focus on your talents, gifts, and abilities, whatever they are, and to really get clear about your identity. Sagittarius. So Saturn's arrival in Pisces is actually the start of a major time for you. And I said this to Gemini, your opposite sign, and I'll say it to you. A lot of the astrology has been happening elsewhere the past few years. And it's not to say that you haven't been feeling it, Sagittarius or Sagittarius rising, but it's been happening primarily in the fixed signs and also by extension in the cardinal signs, especially if we go back to earlier in the last decade. Pluto and Capricorn. But here comes Saturn. And so now Saturn is going through the bottom of what's called your chart. And it's about focusing on home and family and roots and foundation. And over the next few years, you're going to have to answer a few simple questions. Where is home and who is home? There is both the physicality of home, but there is also the emotionality and even the spirituality of home. Where do you belong? And sometimes, Saturn's time through this part of the chart, it's not a physical move. It's an internal move. It's really kind of accepting this life, a little bit of an esoteric point, accepting this life and allowing yourself to fully come in more deeply. But on a pragmatic level, Saturn going through this part of the chart, maybe over the next few years, you will make a major move. Maybe you will buy a house. Maybe you will move in with a partner. Maybe you will get married. I'm using kind of like these more traditional milestones because Saturn typically talks about the bigger traditional, whatever that means to you, milestones of life. But it is about settling down. And you could be like, in your 60s or 70s, like, what are you talking about settling down? But, really kind of coming into your life more deeply. And if you are older, like what was going on in 94, 95, and 96 when Saturn was last in this time, last in this space, for example. But it is about home and family, roots and foundation, the past, memory, parents. Maybe your parents are going to need more of your attention if they're older, or you're becoming a parent, or somebody is moving into your household, or somebody is moving out of your household. Capricorn. So big news, Capricorn. Your planet, gosh, my dog's like coughing up. Big news, Capricorn, your planet Saturn goes into Pisces. And so this is kind of wrapping up that 3-year phase of Saturn in Aquarius where you really focused on your material life, getting your material, kind of making investments or getting your money situation shored up. And then it's very different with Saturn going to Pisces. And it's very likely you're going to feel the difference because the past 6 years, whether it's Saturn and Capricorn or Saturn and Pisces or Saturn and Aquarius, it's been very like analytical or rational or like things that you can kind of know for sure. But in Pisces, it's feeling based, it's intuition. And over the next few years, you need to take your voice seriously, whether it's the words that come out of your mouth or your ability to transmit yourself through your words, whether it's to really become an authority of everything that you have to say. There's a high bar of accountability regardless. Hey, you're a Capricorn, you should know what I'm talking about. When Capricorn goes through a science, and now the high bar of accountability is through your choices, your words, how you think and listen and learn. The next few years are really focused on education, for example. And for some Capricorns, you are actually teaching, you're becoming the teacher. But if you start to really feel more emotional, especially as Saturn goes into Pisces, don't be surprised. And it's a time when you have to sort of really get in touch with your intuition and start to build that connection if you don't have it already. Aquarius, I know Saturn is finally leaving. I know I've had a few Aquariuses that are, my father too, because my father's an Aquarius, who's like, yeah, I'm looking forward to Saturn getting to Pisces. And I'm like, Dad, but then Pluto goes into Aquarius. Okay, we'll talk about that in a couple weeks. So Saturn is leaving Aquarius. It's been a little bit of a heavy time for you the past few years, and now it goes into Pisces, a bit of a different energy. Over the next few years, you may feel life through a more emotional lens, whether it's emotions, whether it's intuition, whether these feelings around compassion and peace or sensitivity. But then Saturn is also in something called your second sign of money and income. And over the next couple of years, you need to really start to build your material life, which seems a little bit at odds because Pisces is such an immaterial sign. Whatever you are sort of building your material life around, it has to align with your spiritual values, it has to align with your spirituality, whatever that may mean. And maybe you're not a very material person, but you have a physical body, you need a roof over your head, you need to make sure you have food. And yes, this is the next few years to really take care of those basics in life. And so for some Aquariuses, you are investing, you're buying property, or for some Aquariuses, you're really working hard to earn more or to really build your income, for example. For some Aquariuses, you need to sort of look at your relationship with money. Maybe it's been very complicated up until this point, for example. Saturn just wants this area to be tip-top. That's just how it works. And everybody is different, but the idea is that your material life, whatever value you have around that, looks different in 2025 and 2026 than it does now. Doesn't mean that you can't make money. Sometimes there's a reputation for Saturn going through this space where it's harder to make a living. If you feel resistance, it's because Saturn is trying to get you to push harder, or Saturn is trying to get you to recalibrate, or Saturn is trying to get you to look more deeply at your relationship with value and worth, and even self-worth. Finally, Pisces. So you are now the belle of the ball. It's your birthday season. Saturn is going into your sign. And what does this even mean, Pisces? So Saturn in your sign says over the next few years, you have to learn to be more self-reliant. You have to stand on your own 2 feet. It's like you can't, rely on anybody else. It's not that you could be in a 30-year marriage or partnership, for example, but it's more about you now. And this is going to mean different things to different Pisces. And maybe you are great at leadership, or maybe you need to work on your leadership skills, for example. Saturn really makes you feel the weight of time, maturity, responsibility. This is a period of maturation for you. It depends, it doesn't matter what time or what phase of life you're in, for example. But it is a little bit of a heavy influence the next few years. And so here's my advice. And it's going to be a little bit different if you're Pisces Sun versus Pisces Rising. But for both, to kind of quote Liz Green and Saturn, A New Look at the Old Devil, it's like, make a friend of Saturn. Saturn wants you to be the mentor, the leader, the authority. And if that's a role that's a little bit foreign to you, well, how do you start to step into it? Do you coach Little League? Do you volunteer? Do you teach? How do you start to step up in your life, for example? Do you become a parent, for example? Sometimes when Saturn goes through the rising sign or the sun sign, we become a parent for the first time. But you're going to have a lot of weight of responsibility on your shoulders the next few years. And so the work, Pisces, for you is to not let it, kind of weigh you down too much, for example. A little bit of a side point to make, Jupiter went through Pisces in 2021 and 2022, and maybe Jupiter was planting some seeds the past couple of years, and now Saturn is here to make them real. And that's the thing, Saturn's job is to make things real. And I'm just going to put my traditional astrology hat on for a moment, because if you are Pisces sun, Saturn will be in the sign of your sun. The sun is a point of vitality in the chart. So you want to, over the next few years, protect your vitality. Take your vitamins, wear your sun hat, eat your vegetables, whatever you need to do to really ensure your health and wellness when Saturn is in the sign. Again, I'm just saying this from a traditional perspective. But for all of you, the idea is that by 2025, 2026, you have really worked to become Saturn. You are now the mentor. You're now the authority. You're now the leader, whatever that role may mean for your life. But there you go. That's your look at the astrology of March 6th through 12th, 2023. Like I said, big moves in March, starting with Saturn's arrival in Pisces. You can get my 3-hour webinar. It's on my website, empoweringastrology.com. The link is also in the show notes. You can sign up for my newsletter. I do put a newsletter out first thing on Monday morning if you want an advanced look at the week, or even information about events that are coming up. Also follow me online, Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, all the things. But it's lovely to see you all again. I'm glad I got my brain out of whatever gear it was when we first started talking, because I was not able to get it to move. But I look forward to, let's say, seeing you all next week, and let's say debriefing from what are our first takeaways from Saturn's arrival in Pisces. So enjoy the full moon, enjoy Saturn in Pisces, and I will see you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.